Today I'm making a dress shirt for my dad. So I'm using the Fairfield button-down pattern by Thread Theory, which is actually constructed just like a dress shirt that you would buy in the store. So the first step is, of course, cutting the pieces out of the fabric. This can be a bit difficult at times because some of the pieces are only cut once and they need to be cut on a specific side of the fabric in order to have the correct direction. Now this material is a cotton shirting. I bought it from Farmhouse Fabrics. That's typically where I get fabric for dress shirts. You can just type in shirting in the search bar and have lots of options come up. There are a lot of markings on these pattern pieces, and the ones on the edges are the ones I find to be especially important, and I just mark them by clipping shallow notches into the fabric. So there are a lot of pieces to this, so I'm going to go over them really quickly. They're in no particular order, it's just however I pick them up as I go. So this is the back yoke, cut 2 on the fold. The collar stand, cut 2. One left front piece. One under collar. One upper collar. 2 sleeve plackets. One back piece on the fold. 4 cuff pieces, 2 sleeves, and 1 right front piece. Additionally, there's some interfacing pieces. So we have a button-on placket, 1 under collar, 1 upper collar, 2 collar stands, and 4 cuffs. Now I'm ironing the pieces again. The fabric was ironed before cutting, but I find it helpful to go over them again after. For the pieces that have interfacing, I'm ironing it onto the wrong side at the same time. The final prep step is just stay stitching the necklines of the 2 front pieces and the 2 yokes. Now on to assembly. Starting with the right shirt front, this is where the notches start coming in handy. You're going to fold the center edge under twice, once at each notch. This turns the raw edge under, and then I'm just sewing 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the first fold. The front left is a little more complicated. It has 3 notches, so I start by folding under twice along the first 2 notches, just like I did for the last piece, and then sew along the 3rd notch. And as you stitch, that should catch the raw edge into that stitching line. And then you unfold it and it creates a pin tuck on the right side of that pattern piece. Then go back and top stitch along the other edge of this placket. Now for the back, there are 2 options. There's one with pleats and one with darts. I'm doing the one with pleats here. So once again, there are notches at the top. This time there are 4. So I have the back piece sitting right sides up, and I take each of the inner notches and pull it over to line up with the nearest outer notch and iron them in place. Now the top of the back should be about the size of the bottom of the back yoke. Now the pleats can be basted in place. I don't really find it necessary, so I go ahead and pin the back to one of the yokes with the right sides facing. Then I take the remaining yoke and pin it with the right side of the yoke facing the wrong side of the back. And what this does is sandwich the back piece in between the 2 yoke pieces. Now I'm sewing all 3 pieces together using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then I turn the yokes up and press that seam. Now the directions do suggest that you can grade the seam, which basically means trimming each of the layers of the seam allowance to different heights in order to reduce bulk, but I don't find that necessary, so I just skip it. The shoulder seams use the burrito method, and that starts by placing the shirt fronts right sides together with the shirt back and pinning them at the shoulder seams of the outer yoke but not the yoke facing. Then roll the body of the shirt up starting at the hem, pull the yoke facing around the rolled up shirt, and pin at the shoulder seams. The front shoulder seams are now sandwiched between the 2 yoke shoulders, and the seam is also sewn with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then pull the body out of this bundle through the neckline and press the shoulder seams. Next, top stitch the shoulder seams as well as the seam where the yoke attaches to the back. At this point, I baste the yoke pieces together at the neckline and stay stitch the armholes. Now the collar has two pieces. There's an upper collar and an under collar. And the upper collar is slightly larger than the under collar, but not by much. So to keep them straight, I usually mark the upper collar just by putting a pin in it. I then place them right sides together and sew along the side and back edges, stretching the under collar so that it fits the upper collar. Then clip the corners and flip it right side out through the open edge. Then I press it, and as I do, I am encouraging the upper collar edge to kind of roll under and pulling those raw edges of both pieces so that they line up. Then go back and stitch around all of the edges. So that's top stitching on the 3 edges that have been sewn and basting the 2 raw edges together. Now I'm attaching the collar stand to the shirt neckline, lining up the center backs, and making sure that the edges of the collar stand extend past the neckline by 1/4 inch on each side. You can clip scant 1/4 inch notches into the neckline to help it lay smoothly on the collar stand if needed. However, in my case, the neckline was a bit too big, so I actually had to kind of carefully ease it back in so that it fit properly. Now take the remaining collar stand and press that straight edge up by 1/4 inch. Then sandwich the collar between the 2 stands and sew them together. Now flip the stand facing to the wrong side and top stitch around the stand, catching that bottom edge where you folded the stand under. And that should be covering the raw edges where the stand is attached to the shirt. Up next, the sleeves, and this is usually the hardest part for me. To start, I need to sew the placket piece to the sleeve. The pattern actually calls for marking all of the lines on the placket pattern piece to the wrong side of the fabric. I don't actually do that. I just cut up the center line and clip those V-shaped notches that are shown on it. I then pin the placket to the sleeve with the right sides of the placket facing the wrong side of the sleeve. The side of the placket that has kind of a longer tab is further away from the edge of the sleeve. And of course the placement on the sleeve is marked with a notch. Once I have the placket placed properly, I sew up from the hem parallel to the cut on the placket. I then pivot at the top where that V-shaped notch is and sew a couple of stitches going that direction. Pivot again at the other side of that V-shaped notch and sew back down to the hem. I then cut open the actual sleeve part along that same opening that's in the placket. Flip the placket to the right side of the sleeve and press. Now on the side of the placket that doesn't have a tab, just fold that raw edge under and sew it. On the other side, I clip a notch where the tab meets the placket and then fold that little piece under and press. I honestly can't figure out how to explain the rest of the placket well. The best way I know to describe it is to unfold that side, turn the long edge under a little, and then fold it back, but not all the way back. It needs to cover the cut edge of the sleeve, but it needs to also overlap the first half of the placket, and then fold that top tab into a triangle and sew all the way around it. Next is attaching the sleeves to the shirt. This is also not easy. The pattern uses flat felt seams, and it actually has the seam allowances already offset to make the process easier, or so the directions say. I sometimes don't know if this is actually easier or not. So first I'm folding the sleeve edge 1/4 inch over to the right side of the fabric and pressing. And that's that curved edge. It's not really easy to do that kind of a thing without a guide. So what I just have is a small piece of cardstock that's been cut to 1/4 inch that I am using to make sure that I'm folding it over properly. Now I'm pinning the sleeve to the arm side with the right sides together like usual, just lining up the folded edge of the sleeve with the raw edge of the shirt. Then they get sewn together with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, making sure not to catch the edge of the sleeve head where it got folded over. And then I trim down the seam allowance of the arm side, but not the sleeve, to about 1/4 of an inch. Then press the seam allowance towards the body of the shirt, and the fold on the sleeve head will cover the raw edges, and then it just gets sewn down. The side seams are also sewn with flat felled seams, and once again the seam allowances are offset. In this case, the back has a 1/4 inch seam allowance and the front has 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and that means there's a 3/8 of an inch difference between the two. So the raw edge of the front of the shirt needs to hang past the back edge by 3/8 of an inch. So that's how I pinned it together, again using a piece of cardstock that's cut to that 3/8 of an inch to help make sure I get the proper spacing. And then it's sewn together. Basically, I'm going by the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance for the front piece. And these seams are sewn actually with the wrong sides together because you want both of the stitches for the flat felled seam to be visible from the outside of the shirt. So then I press the seam toward the back, folding the raw edge under, and top stitch along that fold. This part is tricky. I always have to take it slow because you're basically sewing a tube and it gets really narrow as you get closer to the sleeve hem. To me, it's almost like either sewing through a tunnel or as if the sleeve is going to turn itself inside out. There are 4 cuff pieces. On 2 of them, I fold the straight edge under 1/2 an inch and press it. Then take those 2 pieces and place each of them right sides together with one of the unpressed pieces and sew around the 2 short edges and the long edge that's opposite of the pressed edge. Now I'm pressing a pleat into the hem of the sleeves, again using notches that were clipped earlier. Then place the unfolded edge of the cuff right sides together with the sleeve and sew it. And flip the cuff facing to the back, making sure the folded edge covers the seam allowance. Then top stitch around the entire cuff, making sure to catch the folded edge of the facing. Because the hem of the shirt is curved, I do find it easiest to serge it first, and then I fold it under twice and sew the hem on the sewing machine. Now for all of the buttonholes, I sew these on the machine. There's 8 on the center front. The top and bottom ones get sewn horizontally and the rest of them are sewn vertically, plus there's 2 more on either sleeve. Finally, I sew the buttons on by hand using the buttonholes to get the proper placement. Now you can get one specifically for dress shirts, but I use very basic 1/4 inch white buttons that I have bought in bulk a long time ago, and my dad actually prefers them because they are slightly bigger. And here it is all finished. I do enjoy doing this pattern because it's a bit of a challenge. I do have to really pay attention and keep the instructions close by to make sure I don't do anything in the wrong direction, but at the same time it's not so difficult that it leads to a lot of frustration. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time for another handmade happening.